Well, hello, everybody. We are here for another episode of Step to Story. So, if you have your watches, get your watch on. Let's get our steps on today. And you may be watching this during Christmas time. I don't know when you're watching it, but it is like 105 or 6 degrees where I live, and I definitely had no interest in taking a walk today. So, my step count is very low today. As a matter of fact, I'm only at 2,500 steps, and that's not good for 7 p.m. at night. So, I'm going to change that real quick, but I am so excited to have Brad Ewell back. This is part 3 of his amazing story, and very full of emotions, and so much value comes from this interview for those of you that have grown up being adopted and knew that you were, or recently found out that you were, or maybe are wondering if you are. I think you should write a book someday about this. You should definitely write a book about this someday. This will be a great story, and when you do, we'll put the links in the comments for it. But if you didn't watch episode 1 and 2, I highly recommend you stop this now and go back to the channel on YouTube or the Facebook group for Just Lean In and watch episode 1 first, obviously, and then 2. And then come to this one, because you really need to understand like the backstory of everything that happened. But, just in summary, my friend Brad, his wife, actually, I went to school with my husband. We connected on Facebook, and he has an amazing story to share. And I was excited to interview him. And I had no idea how, I don't want to say interesting, but just engrossed I've been in this story. I actually can't wait to keep doing the episodes, because I'm very interested in how it all turned out, because I really don't know all the details of it. But he, in summary, in his late 40s, discovered unknowingly that he was adopted, and all of a sudden had a brand new family, but also dealt with the pain and trauma of not being told that he was adopted. He came from a very loving home, loving parents, but very frustrated that he was never given this information until he was like 46, 47, 48 years old. And we talked about how he has been dealing with that. We have talked about how he feels like his relationship with his mother would have been better had he had known he was adopted. And we ended our last episode, because there's this may be the most exciting part of the whole program, because I think, from what I understand, there's a pretty happy ending to this story, and continuing part of this story that he's going to share with you, if we're able to get through it in this. And we may be doing additional episodes, because there's a whole lot to cover. But he found out that his biological mother had passed away, and that was obviously hard for him to know, that grieving the biological mother that he never got to meet. And we talked about that in episode 2, and she was a very well-loved woman. And we also discovered that the man that she had him with, ended up marrying her sister, or was married to her sister. Was that right?
Yep, she was married to her before then.
Yes. So that was a whole deal in itself. But now we're going to get to sort of the really, really big stuff in the story. I mean, it's all big stuff, but I think I know a little teeny tiny bit of what he's about to talk about. But I'm going to be letting him do most of the talking, because I don't even know the questions to ask, because I don't know a lot about this part of the story. But what I can tell you is that he did discover that his biological father was alive and was in prison and had committed murder. And he actually watched a Dateline episode. This was after you knew?
Mm-hmm.
After
the discovery.
After he knew where his dad was serving time, randomly Lester Holt, Dateline, comes out with a Dateline special about how these guys are treated in this particular prison. And from what he explains, and he can share this with you again, because we'll catch you back up, is that it was probably a world of emotions. Here's a man that he never knew, but was his biological dad. So he learns this. Then he learns that, he's in prison. That's a lot of information to take in. He learns he's committed murder. That alone, just if you knew, just if you already knew, just if you already had a dad that you'd already known was your dad your whole life, and you found out he had committed murder, that's one whole thing in itself. But here he finds out he has a dad, but his dad's in prison and his dad's committed murder. That's a lot to process. Um, and so, and when I say dad, his dad is the man that raised him, which is his adopted father, but his biological dad is who we're going to be discussing. And his dad that raised him has recently passed, um, but they did make amends, which was good, and we talk about that in episode 2. Never really got to the question of why they didn't reveal the information. My thought process is, the only thing that I can possibly think, and Brad and I talked about this a little bit, maybe his mother was worried that he might, I don't know, think of her differently, or that she felt like a failure, that she couldn't have children, or that he might treat her different. We're not sure why, but those are just some theories that we've thought of. But anyway, so we are going to now find out. I think you did start mentioning the letters. You did talk about the letters that you'd written. He answered a few letters, but I think that's where we ended. You saw where he had been staying in the prison. So take me back to the Dateline episode. Let's go back there. I'm going to start stepping. You're watching this. How are you feeling? And then what happens next? And I'm going to let you kind of guide the rest of this episode.
Sure. So basically what happened was I was at work one day and a buddy of mine asked, he said, "Hey, didn't the bio dad that you find out about, didn't you tell me he was in Angola Penitentiary in Louisiana?" I said, "Yeah, he is." And he said, "Oh, well, Lester Holt's doing a Dateline special on Angola Penitentiary. You might want to watch it." And I had actually read about Angola. I got a criminal justice degree when I went to school. I had read about and studied Angola in my classes for criminal justice. So I knew of it, knew it was a pretty horrible place, and was totally interested in watching a show about it. And basically, Lester Holt spent 3 days living in Angola State Penitentiary, interviewing inmates, interviewing guards, interviewing the warden, and basically just kind of showing life inside of there. And what happened with that was, I think we talked about this in episode 2, but if I'll just hit on it again anyway. I had done pretty good with my story as long as I kept it kind of at an arm's length distance. So my biological father, I understood that he existed, but the only thing I had done with this point is email back and forth with him a few times. And that seemed like pretty safe. And it really didn't personalize him much. He was still more of, I'd say, a concept in my head than an actual physical person, because I had seen older pictures of him, but I had never seen his.
Let's show a picture. And we're going to show a picture here on the show. If you see the side-by-side picture, the resemblance is incredible. And that picture that you have is, you guys are about the same age there.
Yeah, that was pretty weird. So I had done good with all this. And when I watched the Lester Holt special, for whatever reason, that derailed me. And suddenly in my head, he went from being a concept, even though he wasn't on the special, but because I saw where he lived, saw where he'd been living for the past 50 years, or I guess back then it was 48, it became a lot more real to me that I knew a real person living in this prison. And after I saw the special, that was the last time I slept for 3 days straight. Now, it didn't help that I was working a night shift, trying to sleep during the day, which is hard enough. But with all of that spinning around in my head, I ran 3 days straight without ever going to sleep. And on day 3, back at work, trying to function as a police officer, I suddenly realized this was not going to work. So I called our employee assistance program, got myself set up with a therapist, excuse me, and decided that I was going to have to work through this with some help rather than just say, "Oh, this is fine. It's just kind of a weird story," because suddenly I wasn't managing it near as well as I thought I was. So in therapy, one of the first things that I wanted to figure out was, did I want to meet my biological father? Which may sound like a weird thought process, but I have adoptee friends that found out late in life. I have adoptee friends that have known their whole lives, and it runs the gamut. There are adoptees that never want any information about their biological family, and then there's adoptees that want to know everything. And there's some rhyme or reason I've seen to it, but for the most part, some people want to know and some people just don't, and that's their stance. I've seen a few people switch that didn't want to know that suddenly did want to know, and that usually occurred right about the same time that the parents that raised them passed, because I think for them it felt like a betrayal to seek out biological family. Um, I couldn't leave it alone, but wasn't sure. Like I said, I liked it as a concept because I could keep it at arm's length. That's one of the reasons I had never talked to him on the phone. Was anything I did, talk to him on the phone, see him face to face, any of that would make him more of a real person. Right now, he was just a concept, somebody I knew of that was in prison. Yes, I knew he was biologically my father, but it felt better with him still being a concept that I didn't hear a voice, didn't know an actual face or anything like that. Well, in therapy, after several sessions, what my therapist finally said to me was, what you got to decide is, because I was 48 at the time I found out. My biological father was 50 or 77, I think, if I remember right. So she said, he's older. If you wake up and find out he died tomorrow, is it going to bother you that you never had a chance to lay eyes on him? And I took that home, talked with Pam, my wife, for a while, mulled it over and over and over, and came to the conclusion that I needed to bring closure to this. I was never going to meet my biological mother. She had died well before I ever knew. And that if I did the same thing and avoided the opportunity to at least see my biological father once, that was just going to leave another big gaping hole in a story that already had too many holes in it for me. So I decided I was going to meet him. I emailed him and told him that. We set up a time to talk on the phone about it. And it was I'll say this up front because it sounds weird when I tell this part. He was 100% upfront about everything he told me. He said, listen, I can set this up for you. All I need is your full name, your date of birth, your driver's license number, your social security number. And I'm sitting there as he's telling me all this going, I don't give this to anybody, especially not somebody I know that's sitting in prison. That's not happening. So I went, oh yeah, I'll have to round all that up for you. And then instead I called the prison, told them who I was, what the plan was about me wanting to get on his visitation list, and asked them what I would need to do. And they said, well, we'll send you these forms you have to fill out. And that's the start. Well, he actually did need every bit of information he said he needed. It was almost like applying for a job to apply to visit the prison.
Do you think it helped that you were a policeman?
I think so, because that already in their mind kind of knocks me down as a security threat.
Yeah.
Because anything that I would do, if I was to bring contraband in the prison, that would also cost me my job on the outside. So I was less likely to do something like that than the average person with family.
Can you tell the viewers, like, this isn't your regular run-of-the-mill jails. This is like big time prison? Is this like the highest security prison?
Yeah, Angola is a maximum security. It's the maximum security prison in Louisiana. It's a prison. I've seen a handful of prisons in my life. It's a prison unlike any I've ever seen before. I'd have to look it up to tell you the size of it, but I can tell you that when I went to visit, the drive from the front gate when I got checked in to the camp where he was housed took about 15 minutes.
Wow.
So it wasn't like you show up at a building and you walk into prison. Angola is an old southern plantation in Louisiana that is, I may be cutting it way short, but I want to say between like 14 and 20,000 acres.
Wow.
And across this old plantation, they have small camps set up to house prisoners. The main part of the plantation or prison now is used to grow all of the food for all of Louisiana State Penitentiary, like all the other prisons in Louisiana. They grow all their food there. They raise all the beef there. They raise all the animals. They are a self-sustaining thing.
That's interesting. Is it? I don't know much about. I don't usually watch the I watch true crime, but I don't usually watch the shows about inside.
Would you describe it as a, you know,
I'm sure there's some prisons they say are like a resort compared to others. Like, what? How would you describe the vibe here?
I think the best way to describe it is back in the 70s and 80s, and I don't think it's done much to really change its old title. It was once known as the bloodiest prison in America.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's a hellhole.
And why was? I mean, I guess he committed murder, but is he? See that? I guess he's that much of a threat.
Well, that's where anybody serving life in Louisiana stays, is in Angola.
Got it.
So that's where he was. So I met with my counselor, decided I want to visit him once and go through the rigmarole of getting that set up. It was probably the weirdest letter to ever be excited about. Was, you think back to being late teens, getting out of high school, and you're waiting for your college acceptance letter. I literally was overwhelmed with excitement when I got a letter saying that I had been accepted as a visitor for Angola State Penitentiary.
Oh my gosh.
I've still got the letter, and I was just like, oh, I finally get to go. Okay. So
you got to write a book about this, Brad.
I slowly am. It's a little hard.
I will be pushing it, but go ahead.
So I get the letter, we get a visit set up, and you have to remember, when I tell this story, at this point, I'd been a police officer for like 27 years. I had dealt with a lot of people that had been in prison, out of prison. I'd put a lot of people in prison. And I had a pretty solid expectation of what I expected to meet in there. When we got the visit set up, one of the first things he told me was, hey, listen, because you're a police officer and you're coming to visit from out of state, I can get you a special visit. And basically, instead of the normal hour-long visits that they do here, you can stay all day if you want to, because I know the warden and I can ask him and he'll let me do this. And in the back of my head, what I'm thinking is,
what if you don't want to stay all day?
Well, no, not even that. I was thinking, sure, you know the warden, and sure, he's going to give you this special favor. Right. It sounded like inmate bravado to me.
But he actually did, didn't he?
Well, we'll talk about it. So we get it set up, and I go to Louisiana.
You didn't mention something. Maybe you didn't. I can't remember if you said this in episode 2. What was he like on the phone?
I mean, nice enough. You've got to remember it. So you don't have to remember. It's something that I never knew until then. It's prison phone calls. I got 10 minutes at a shot on the phone with him.
Okay.
And I wasn't really, I'll get to this, but I wasn't that excited to really, at this point, to talk to him. I just knew I needed to close this loop in my story. It wasn't like I sat around all day going, man, I hope I get to talk to my bio dad today. It was almost like an assignment more than something I looked forward to.
Okay.
But I knew I had to get it done.
So you're driving up. Was it just you, or did Pam go too?
Pam went with me to Louisiana. I refused to take Pam to prison with me. I can't bring myself to do that.
Did she want to go?
I don't know, because I told her I wasn't going to take her, so there really wasn't much talk about it after that.
I understand. My husband probably would have been the same way.
Yeah, I just didn't dig taking her into that environment.
So you're driving up by yourself?
So we drove to Pam and I went to Louisiana together, and then we went out, had a couple beers, had a dinner, went to bed, and then the next morning at like 6 a.m, I got up and started getting ready to go to Angola.
Is your heart racing?
A little bit, mainly because there is a laundry list of rules that there are to go visit somebody in prison. You can't wear certain colored clothes. You can't wear open-toed shoes. The list goes on and on of all the things you can't do. And I had really planned this as a one-and-done visit. It was a guy in prison. I didn't know anything about him. I knew I needed to meet him once. But I really planned to go up there, meet him face-to-face, find out whatever he was willing to tell me about himself and whatever he could tell me about my bio mom, and then roll on back and maybe email him every once in a while. But I never intended to step foot in Angola past this one day.
Okay.
So I I do the Santa Claus thing. I make my list. I check it twice. I stand in front of the mirror and run down the list of things I can and can't wear. Do I have anything in my pockets I'm not supposed to have? Because my fear was it's a 7-hour drive to Baton Rouge from my house and then another hour to Angola. So I really didn't want to make a 16-hour round trip just to get turned away because I had the wrong color shirt on or something. So I got there, got checked in, got searched, and I knew of Angola, but I didn't do a lot of research on it. So the first shocker to me was once I got all set and they're like, okay, just go back to this waiting room, a little airport, like a shuttle bus pulls up to the back of this building and they come in with a list of names and one of them was mine. Like, okay, come get on the shuttle bus. And I'm thinking, well, I mean, I'm at prison. Why am I getting on a shuttle bus? And like I said a minute ago, that was because I had a 15-minute ride back to the camp that he was in. So I think when I looked at it on Google Maps from the main gate to where I finally got off the bus to get to go visit him was about 4.5 miles inside the prison.
Were there other people on the bus?
There was one other lady on the bus with me. I got there first thing in the morning because I didn't know how long it would last. And I didn't know if if they'd get full and I'd have to wait. So we were both there pretty early. Fortunately, I think for me, she ended up going to the same camp I did. They've got several camps there. She and I both got off at the same camp to go visit. And she asked me, said, is this your first time here? And I said, yeah, I have no idea what I'm doing. She goes, just follow me. I'll walk you through it. And I'm like, okay. And it's weird because I had worked in the Dallas County Jail for 3.5 years before I became a police officer. And in the scope, I mean, prison is way bigger than county jail, but it's all the same sounds. The electronic doors unlocking, the big crash gate slamming shut and locking. It all sounds the same. So I'm standing there going, oh, I mean, this isn't so bad. I know all these noises. I know all these sounds. And so you have to recheck in at the camp. You get verified that you are who you are and walk back to the visitation room. The visitation room, you see them in movies in two different ways. The ones where there's the glass wall between people and everybody sits one on one side, one on the other side talking on the phone. Or it's like a big open day room. This was much more like a big open day room. It reminded me of like an old church meeting room. It had that generic tile on the floor, white cinder block walls. It had a mural painted on the wall and round plastic tables, the same plastic chairs I remember from high school. It was just kind of a low rent meeting room. When I got there, she and I went in. And there was nobody there to visit anybody yet. I didn't learn this till later, but he was actually housed in a different prison camp, and they brought him from that camp over to this camp for his visit that day. I don't know why they did that, but that's what they did. So,
does he used to getting visitors?
A handful. He has a handful of friends that visited him on a semi-regular basis. I mean, all of his family that's still living at that point was in Texas in the Dallas area, and he's in Angola. So it's a haul for anybody to go visit him. He had a couple friends that he had done some time with that had gotten out that he kept in touch with by phone, but they weren't really excited and didn't want to come back into the prison. So for the most part, it was family, and those were kind of few and far between just because of the distance to travel. So me and this one other lady that just showed up are sitting in the visitation room. The first thing I noticed was, other than the two of us, there were 3 guards in there. And there were 6 inmates working a kitchen area that all had knives and spatulas. And I'm like, well, I already hate this because the inmates are armed. There's only 3 guards. And this just already seems like it's a bad idea. So I waited for a while. The lady who rode on the bus with me, her visitor came in. Several other people had come in and out of the room. And, where the inmates that are coming to visit come from is behind a wall, because basically when they get to visitation, they get searched before they're allowed in the visitor's room. So you could hear the electronic buzz, and you'd know to watch around the corner to see who came around the corner. And one by one, when people came around the corner, I'd be like, oh no, that's not him. And I didn't have a new picture of him, but I just knew it wasn't him. And finally heard the buzz, waited a little bit, and this guy walks in the room, and I'm like, oh my God, that's what I'm going to look like when I'm in my 70s. That's him. Oh, so I'd sent him recent pictures of me. So he had recent pictures of me. So he knew who I was and was walking towards me. And I stood up trying to figure out if I do the handshake hug thing. How do you greet your father that you've never met before? And you're both now full-grown adult. You're a full-grown adult and he's an older man. So we finally, when he got to me, we did the kind of half handshake hug guy thing that guys do and pat each other on the back, and sat down. And as soon as we sat down, I kind of steeled myself for what I expected, which was most people, I won't say all because there's exceptions, but the vast majority of people that I've dealt with that have been in prison, were heading to prison, or were just regulars going to jail, pretty much had the same characteristics, which were they couldn't take responsibility for what they did. They were always going to jail because the world was against them and somebody else did something bad to them. And had the world not been against them, they wouldn't be in jail. And that's kind of what I expected. And after coming out of a 48-year cover-up with my parents, I was not ready for somebody else that couldn't take responsibility for their life and their actions, which was one of the big reasons this in my head was a one and done visit with him. So he sat down at the table with me and said, well, son, it's nice to meet you. I want to get this started off on the right foot by being honest with you.
So he said son again?
Yep.
How'd that make you feel?
It was okay face to face. It wasn't near as weird as the first time, just because the first time he did it by email, I was so, I had just learned a couple of weeks before that biologically the parents that raised me weren't my parents. I wasn't ready for somebody else to call me son then.
Right.
This is now just shy of a year after I found out. So I'd had a little more time to let it all settle. So he said, I want to be truthful with you. And for me as a cop, that sets all the alarm bells and whistles off, because typically when I'm at work and somebody says, okay, I want to shoot straight with you and tell you the truth, that's the beginning of the long lie story that I'm going to get about what happened. It's very rarely, and then they tell me the whole truth. So all my alarm bells went off, and I was like, just hear a story. It doesn't matter. You don't need to prove right or wrong. Just get the information you can out of it. And he started off and said, well, I could tell you that I'm here because I was an alcoholic and I was doing drugs and I was addicted to drugs at the time. And that would be true because I was doing all that. I was using drugs. I was drinking. I was an alcoholic. I was a drug addict. So all of that was true, but I can't blame what I did on that. I did it because I made a horrible decision that I can never change. I can never go back and fix. And there's really nothing I can do about it. And that right there made a huge inroads for me, because he was immediately just accepting, I did what they said I did, and I'm here because I did that, and it's nobody's fault but mine.
That's look. You're right. Most of them. What does they say in Shawshank? Everybody's innocent in Shawshank.
Yeah. Well, I worked in a Dallas County jail for 3.5 years, and I learned, like, my second day, you couldn't ask anybody why they were in jail, because nobody was in jail for any good reason. What I learned that I had to ask was, what did they say you did? And then they'd tell me whatever offense they were currently in jail for, because they would never say they did it.
Got it. So
with him owning the murder immediately, I was kind of rocked back on my heels, because I'm like, whoa, he just was straight up and told me the truth.
Now, am I allowed to ask this, and we can edit this out? Was this somebody he knew, or was this just a random thing?
It was kind of random. It wasn't, I'll say this, it wasn't a crime of passion or anything like this. It was a premeditated, planned murder.
Okay.
It wasn't like he walked in on his wife cheating and got mad and killed somebody. This was a planned out murder.
Got it.
So he owned that, but then he kept going. He started telling me a laundry list of things that he had done on the outside and inside prison, all illegal, all stuff that I would have never, ever found out had he not told me. And he just spilled it all.
Why? I wonder why.
Well, I have two theories. One is I really think he wanted to be upfront with me. He had a very strained relationship with his other biological son. And I think he felt like he wanted to tell me the truth. And then he and I've talked about it a little bit, and he's never really given me a yes or no answer. But I also feel like part of it was a test. If he told me all the bad stuff he did, just like I didn't intend to get very invested in him, I think he knew if he spilled everything he did at the onset, he didn't invest a lot in me if I turned my back and never spoke to him again.
Well, I wanted to mention something that came to my mind. Also gives me a chance to stop stepping for a second. I wonder when he got this news, and I'm sure you'll be able to tell me, if he almost felt like he had a second chance and a redo, or maybe was able to show, be that, maybe in some ways was glad that you didn't see some of the things he did, and now he's got a second chance to meet you. He did tell you what he's done, but maybe he's got a plan moving ahead. I don't know. Maybe he was like, this may have been like a huge blessing to him for you to appear.
He's never, later he's told me that it was. We've never really talked about what he felt initially, other than the same shock I felt, because he didn't know I existed until I knew he existed. He didn't know that he had another son out there. And
no idea.
No, he knew that my bio mom was pregnant, did not believe it was his, and was not around when I was born. So he had no clue, and bio mom gave me up for adoption immediately after birth. So by the time I'm sure he came back through Dallas at some point before he ended up in prison, but by the time he was back in Dallas, my bio mom, is the day that I was relinquished for adoption, she went home, packed her stuff up with her sister, and she and her sister moved back to Stockton. So they were no longer in Dallas.
Did she know that it was his?
I think so. I think that's the reason she didn't list him on the birth certificate, was because she didn't want that to come up about who my father was. So he starts telling me all this stuff he's done, and it wasn't a bragging thing. It was just this is who I was before I ended up in here. And then continued on about, and when I got in here, these are the things I did to survive. And when he got done, I was just dumbfounded, because he had just owned so much stuff in a matter of maybe 10 minutes.
And how did you respond?
Well, I was just dumbfounded. So I sat there for quite a while and just let it all kind of sink in. And then I asked him, what do you want to know about me? And he said, well, I don't know anything about you, so just tell me about yourself. So I kind of went through my story from being a kid, the things I did with my parents that raised me, going off to college, eventually becoming a police officer.
I noticed that you say that a lot. Do you say that a lot now? My parents that raised me versus just my parents?
I do, not because there's some big distinction in my head, but when I tell this story, it's just too confusing if I don't make the distinction.
Got it. That's what I was just curious.
Yeah, no, there's so many players in this story. When you tell it, if I don't make distinctions, people always have to stop me and ask who I'm talking about.
Got it. Okay.
So we went through kind of all of that, how I ended up being a police officer and what I had done as a police officer. And then I said, okay, so tell me just about you outside of all the stuff you've done. Who are you? What do you like? What do you like? What do you dislike? What kind of music do you like? Do you read? Do you watch movies? What's your personality like? And he went through all of that. And probably 2 or 3 sentences in, when he was talking about his personality, I put my hand up and said, I've got to stop you for a second and tell you, because this is really weird. I feel like you're sitting across the table telling me about me. And then I have to realize that you're talking about you.
Wow.
And one of the reasons that was weird for me is personality wise, I was, especially growing up, I was very, very different from the parents that raised me. Personality wise, we were on the opposite ends of the spectrum.
So you stated this in one of our videos, and I don't remember if it was privately us talking or publicly, but you're a big believer in genetics versus nature versus nurture. Like, you're a big believer that genetics is stronger?
Yeah, I would say that I do believe genetics ultimately is stronger, which we can dive off into later. But yeah, there's some I mean, it's all personal experience, but my personal experience is yes, it is.
Okay.
Because if genetics or if nurture was that much stronger, I would be a super introvert or super extrovert. I would like all kinds of things that I have no interest or desire to do. And then when I meet this person that biologically I came from, we're exactly alike. So he's telling me all about that. I tell him, gosh, it feels like you're talking to me about me. So then that led into what I was like. And what was weird was when he started telling me, when he first sat down and started confessing all of his misdeeds of life to me, it was like the whole room just shrunk into he and I. Like if you picture a movie scene, the camera just tightens up to the one person that's talking. It wasn't until probably an hour or so into the visit where I kind of leaned back in the chair, stretched my back to catch my breath, and looked around. And because I've been a police officer for so long, kind of hypervigilance is my thing. I'm hypervigilant about everything. And I was shocked when I looked around in the visitation room that had started when he walked in with maybe 5 or 6 of us in there outside of the inmates working in the guards, had probably 50 people in it. And I had no idea I knew where they came from, but I couldn't tell you when any of these other people had gotten there. I was so locked on to him that I had no idea what was going on around me.
Yeah, this would make a good movie, by the way.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about that.
So we talked for a while more, and eventually he's like, well, do you want to get lunch? And I looked at the clock on the wall and was like, oh, wow. I mean, I got there. I think I got back to visitation at like 8:30 or 9, and it's now noon, and it's lunchtime, and I have no idea where the hours have gone.
So that's a good thing.
It really is.
Like going on a first date, usually you just grab coffee because if you're dinner, then you're committed.
Right.
This is going so well as can be expected. Time's gone by fast.
Yeah, much different than I expected. So we grabbed lunch. They have.
You grab lunch? Like, what do they have? Like Chick-fil-A? Like what?
No, they had a whole, I told you they had inmates with knives and spatulas. They have a whole working kitchen in the visitation room run by inmates.
So did the food like have bugs in it and all that?
No, it was really good. It was, he's a big fish eater, and they did catfish fillets and shrimp with a little salad and French fries.
Really?
Mm-hmm. It was good.
Is that food they eat as well, or is that more for the visitors?
It's more for the visitation room. I eventually learned that he worked, he had been there long enough and done enough decent stuff that he worked as a trustee, and they got treated pretty good food-wise. So they did pretty good food-wise, but short of visitation room food and a few special meals, he was not like a prison cafeteria person. He didn't like eating there. So we got lunch. He asked me if I wanted to get a picture with him, and I'm thinking, what? And sure enough, that I told you there's a mural on the wall. Well, they have a guy with an old school digital camera, like back from the 90s, maybe, that will, you pay the prison, but I think for $2.50 a piece, they'll snap a picture of you and the person you're visiting, print out at $2.50 a piece, however many copies you want.
Oh.
And he can keep it, you can keep it. So we got some pictures done, sat back down, chatted some more. And all of a sudden, like I said, I had no more concept of time, and it was 4:00 in the afternoon.
Wow.
And visitation was closing.
Were you allowed to have your phone in there? Probably
No.
not. Okay.
One of the suckiest parts about meeting him for the first time in prison is no phone, no pen, no paper, no nothing.
So it's like, it'd have been
So
cool if you could have FaceTimed with your wife or.
I didn't even care about that. I wanted to write stuff down because everything he told me history-wise, I had to remember. Because even though things were going well, I still wasn't quite sure bigger picture where this was headed.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, this is like being at your wedding or like your adrenaline's going so much.
Oh yeah.
You don't remember anything.
No, so I'm struggling to remember things he's telling me. And all of a sudden it's 4:00 and I have to go.
It's from 8 to 4?
Yes. It's really from 8 to 5, but by the time they round everybody up, bus them back to the gate, it's time to get out. But
So, and is it only allowed once a week?
They do it on, I believe, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. But you can come, I think it's once every 2 weeks, if I remember right. And for me, and I mean, I don't blame him at all. Mine was set up as what they call a special visit. I wasn't on his visitor list because I think just like me, I'm thinking this is a one and done thing. He has no idea if I'm ever coming back. There's a lot of work to change your visitor list as an inmate. So he didn't want to change it if I was going to show up and never want to see him again.
Did you ever have any doubt that he might not show up? So I've heard stories like that where the prisoner doesn't come to the visit.
No, because we had emailed back and forth and there didn't seem to be any hesitation on his part about meeting me.
Okay.
So I felt pretty comfortable he'd be there. So we wound up our visit. I gave him a big hug and told him I'd talk to him later and went back out, got bussed back over to the front gate, back outside the front gate, got in the car, and the first thing I did was call Pam. And,
did you
she asked the perfect question.
Shed some tears or?
No, not really. There wasn't much emotion to it right then. But so I called her and she's like, well, how did it go? And I said, I really don't know what to do because my plan was to do this one and done visit and I like him. And I don't know what to do with that because that was not part of my plan. Liking him was never part of my equation. It was go meet him, see half of why you landed here on Earth and move on with your life. So
I'm glad that you liked him because, you've been through so much. That's a good thing,
Oh, it was a great thing, but I think maybe it's not everybody. Pam and I are both like this. Shifting your thought process that far a different direction is really hard. So to show up somewhere going, it's the only time I'm ever going to talk to this person in my life, and 8 hours later going, I'd talk to him again tomorrow if I could. That's a hard thing for your brain to wrap around and go, wait, no, that wasn't the plan at all.
Oh, I have to say something funny.
Mm-hmm.
This is nothing like this, but when I had my first date with my husband, I'd never met him and I knew I wasn't going to like him. And I knew it. I didn't think we matched. We met online and I just thought, no, not my type, but I'll go have coffee. He was very persistent and he was a doctor. So I thought, well, at least his background check passed, so I didn't try to dress up or anything. And I'll never forget, he walked up. I thought he was super attractive and super fun. And I went from this whole time thinking, I'm not going to like this guy. When he left, I just wanted to talk to him the next day.
Yep.
Not the same as yours, but I get what you mean. Mm-hmm.
So I drive my hour back, get Pam. We go to a little brewery in Shreveport. The Shreveport? Yeah. Went to a little brewery in Shreveport, had a couple more beers, went out for dinner, and got back to the hotel and slept like a rock because I was exhausted.
Oh, I'm sure. And mostly probably emotionally.
Oh, yeah. It was super emotional. My brain was just wrung dry because I'd been trying to remember everything somebody said for 8 hours. And so next morning we got up and drove back to Texas.
Because you couldn't go back the next day.
Nope. No, you couldn't go back. So.
And when you email, is it just like one a day or how does that work?
You can email as much as you want to, and I won't dive off into my long thoughts on the prison industrial complex and what a money-making machine it is, but
Or do they charge for them?
every time I email my father, it cost me 25 cents for the letter. If I add a picture to it, it costs another 25 cents. When he emails me back, it costs him 25
It
cents.
sounds like Disney World or
Yeah.
one of the places you go and it costs money just to take a step.
Yes, it's exactly what it's like. And then when you realize, and then I think phone calls back then were, he could only pay for the phone calls. Like they didn't do a call collect anymore, like you see in movies. He had to have money on his account to make phone calls to people in the outside world. And those 10-minute phone calls cost $2.50.
How do they make money in prison? They have jobs?
You are expected to work when you're in prison. So you have a job that you get paid for in prison. The hourly wage, I believe he told me when I was there, was 3 cents an hour. So take 3 cents an hour and do the quick math and tell me how long you've got to work to earn $2.50 for a phone call.
I mean,
you're working you're working more than a full day to get your quarter for your email.
wow.
So the way they subsist in there, and the way he subsisted was initially when he got there, he did a lot of illegal stuff that he got paid for.
Can people send money to their loved ones in prison?
Yes, you can put money on people's books, so that helped him. He has a sister that would send him money, some friends that sent him a little bit of money. And then what happened was about 30 years into his prison stay, and this was something that came out during our visit, was he decided that all the rackets that he was running in prison were just ensuring that if he ever had a chance to get his sentence commuted, were ensuring that he would never, ever get a chance to get out.
Oh, he was doing stuff illegal in the prison?
Oh, yeah.
Like, can you, not him per se, but like what kinds of things what do people do in prison illegal? Like, what can you do in there?
Sell drugs, run prostitutes, run protection.
How? Like
teams.
through the internet or?
No, sell to other inmates, sell drugs to other inmates. So
how do they get them in there?
Visitors and guards.
Wow.
He told me he didn't get sober in prison until he'd been there for 30 years.
You mean people do drugs in prison?
Yes. Every street drug you can get out here, you can get in prison.
Wow. They drink alcohol too?
Most of the time they home make that, but yeah. You can make a wonderful concoction called toilet wine in a trash bag. I can show you how to do it.
So I guess I just assumed if you're in a prison, I don't mean to sound ridiculous here, but like there's security watching every step and everything that's happening. Like, I guess not.
They try hard, but I think Angola has 6,500, 7,000 inmates. Are you really watching 7,000 people all the time? Their guards make, I think, less than Texas minimum wage. So are their guards really motivated, or are their guards more motivated by, if I let this visitor sneak in a little weed and they give me $100, I made more than I should have made all week.
So a lot of the guards, if not you just this particular prison, but all prisons, you're saying are in cahoots with the prisoners.
There's always, not all of the guards, but are some of the guards? Absolutely.
Unbelievable. So this is fascinating. Maybe I should start watching some of those shows. So they basically are running their whole little world inside the prison doors. Like things are happening in there, like they happen out here. Do they get cell phones in there?
Yeah. I mean, they don't legally, but yes.
You know, it's interesting if you're someone that's innocent and has been falsely accused, take everything you can, but somebody that's done something absolutely horrific that doesn't bother me so much, you know, that some of the things you're sharing with me, like the phone call situation, like somebody that's done something like awful, you know, horrific and has not changed. But how could anyone even rehabilitate, like with some of the things you've just been sharing with me? It seems like.
Well, and that was probably one of his biggest endearing points to me was he fully admitted for the first 30 years in prison, he was a really horrible dude. He did all the same stuff he did outside on the inside.
Wait, back up. You said prostitution. How would that happen? Aren't the prisons like all men, all women?
Yeah.
But they're able to figure that out.
There's men that dress up as women, and you pimp them to other men that want to have sex with them.
In the prison.
Yeah.
And is this true? The old myth, pedophiles, people that do things to children get treated very badly in prison.
I don't know about that in Angola. I would assume it is. Where I worked in Dallas County, it absolutely was. So yes, I would think so.
Like those are the bottom of the barrel.
Yeah, those are housed separately in protective custody because they're not safe around other inmates.
Yeah, because even bad dudes on the street don't like kids getting hurt.
Nope.
Yeah.
So, but he was endearing to me because he had made a choice in what you said was the biggest point of it. He had made his choice to turn around in a place that gave him no motivation to turn around. So it's obvious we're going to have to go into another episode.
Yeah, this is like I'm like, what's next?
Yeah, but I'll explain this before we run out of time today because I think it helps make it make sense.
Yeah.
So when he went to prison in 1972. At that time, so he pled guilty to murder and they gave him a life sentence. A life sentence in Louisiana in 1972 was a guaranteed you have to do 10 years and 6 months. And then you were eligible for a flat release or a parole after 10 years and 6 months. It didn't mean you were getting out, but you were eligible. So that was in 1972.
That's a whole other episode I want to talk about. I still don't understand our justice system. Like if you get life in prison, like for people that like, I don't understand how some people get life, some people get 2 life, some people get 10 to life. Like, I don't know.
So for him, I've got his sentencing paperwork. His sentencing paperwork said he got life.
But not without the possibility of parole.
Correct.
Okay.
So, and I've got more paperwork on that shows that, yes, they were letting inmates out in 10 years and 6 months. Back then, all it took to get out was a letter from the warden saying that you had been good in prison and they could just commute your sentence and let you out.
Really?
Yes. So that's 72.
I bet you that they paid people to do stuff like that.
They absolutely did. So in 1973, so late 72 is when the Supreme Court did the moratorium on the death penalty. That caused a panic in just about every prison because all of a sudden you had all these death row guys that were going to be possibly converted to lifers. And they looked and realized we have guys on death row that if they get commuted to life are technically eligible for release at 10 years and 6 months. And we had them on death row before. So they had a legislative session and decided 10 years and 6 months was crazy. And that the new minimum sentence for a lifer in Louisiana was 20 years. But the weird thing they did that constitutionally, I still don't think they could do, but they did it, was they retroactively applied that to everybody serving time. So he took a plea deal with the possibility of parole in 10 years or release in 10 years and 6 months. And within a year of incarceration, he now had to do a flat 20 before he was eligible. Fast forward to their next legislative session, which was 2 years later. So he's now served 3 years, looking at a possibility of parole at 20 years. They decide that 20 years is too short for a lifer. They have to do 40 and retroactively applied it to everybody serving.
So I just thought of something. He went to prison around your age, right?
What do you mean?
What age did he go to prison?
27.
Oh, wait. How long has how long has he been in prison?
He was in there for 50 years.
Oh, I thought you said 30 years.
No, 50. No, I said that he did bad things in prison for his first 30 years there.
50 years of his life in prison.
Yep. So he starts in 72, 10 years and 6 months. 73, it's now 2 years into his sentence. He's doing 20 years. 2 more years in a legislative session again. They meet and say 20 years isn't long enough. You have to do 40 if we gave you life and retroactively apply it to everybody serving time. So now within 5 years of what he thought was a 10-year, 6-month stint, he's doing a flat 40 before he's eligible for release.
Hmm.
Fast forward 2 more years, their next legislative session, he's now served 5 years. So he would have been almost halfway to his initial eligibility for release date. Now he's decades away from a possible release date.
Did he have a good attorney or?
Not really.
Yeah.
But they meet again, legislator meets again and says, we're Louisiana, and if we gave you life, it means life. You die in prison and you are no longer eligible for parole or release.
When did he find that out?
5 years into his sentence.
So he thought he was there for life.
So he at that point he was there for life. To be released at that point. So that would have been, I think, let's see. That would have been like 77, I think, that he was looking at. Now he's doing a flat life. Like he's not walking out. The only possibility for release at that point was you had to get your sentence commuted from a life sentence to a numbered sentence. It could be 99 years or anything. But anything with a number on it came with parole eligibility. A flat life without a number attached to it had no parole eligibility. So he was now doing life without parole.
I'm surprised the suicide rate is that high in prison?
I think so.
Yeah, I mean.
So now this guy is like 32, looking at spending the entire rest of his breathing days living in Angola State Penitentiary. So
did he ever, not that you need to go into it, but did he ever go into detail about what he did?
The murder, you mean? Or what he did in prison?
The murder.
Bits and pieces. I know most of the story now from, it's not something he likes talking about, but I dug off into a lot of stuff in newspapers.com, got all those articles, which I'll tell you most were wrong. Talked to some people that he knew back when he committed his crime. They told me some versions of the story outside of the newspaper story that, for me made a lot more sense, not because I wanted the newspaper story not to be true, but just because I know criminals and the version of the story the newspaper had didn't make sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
The story they told me made perfect sense. So yeah, I have a pretty good grasp on why he did what he did and all that.
Got it.
So he's 7 years into what he thought was or 5-ish years into what he thought was a 10-year sentence, and he's now doing life without parole.
And he's like 37,
32, I think.
32.
So to me, what you said was very true. Instead of just doing whatever he wanted to do because he had no chance for release. Now he did. For the first 30 years, he did all kinds of illegal stuff in prison. 30 years in, I guess he would have been late 40s, early 50s.
Mm-hmm.
He suddenly decided that wasn't the person he wanted to be anymore. Now, it came after having a massive heart attack and almost dying in prison. But he decided that wasn't the person he wanted to be, and he was going to change his life. And once again, like you said, with no motivation from anybody on the outside to change his life, because as far as he knew, he was dying in that place. So to me, it takes, and I mean, I've now met way more people than I ever thought I would know that were in prison or had been in prison. It takes a special kind of person to look at your life, know that nothing you do can really change your circumstance, and still decide to be better than you were.
He reminds me so much of the Morgan Freeman's character.
Yeah.
He said, I was a stupid kid, committed a stupid crime. I wish I could go back and change it. He did some illegal things in the prison, but overall, that reminds me a lot of that, that story. Gosh.
So that's one of the things that really stuck with me as I kind of pondered where to go with the relationship with him was as weird as it is to say about a dude that had spent at that point 47, 48 years in prison for murder, he seemed like a decent man.
Oh, God.
Which was the last thing I expected to meet in prison.
Yeah,
I've never met anybody, even in law enforcement, that had spent as much time in prison as he did. And he was the least incarcerated minded person I'd ever met.
So on our next episode, I want to hear like a little bit about his time in prison, the stories he's told you. And I want to hear, like, was he, well known for what? Did he have friends in there? Was he a tough guy? Was he a big teddy bear? Like, his personality? Did he have girlfriends through the years? Did he write to people? Like, all this stuff I want to hear, if you know that stuff. And then I know there's a lot more to come and what happens next, because I assume there was another visit.
Oh, yeah. Well, so, and this is probably a good way to wrap it up. So my first visit with him was February 18th of 2020. March 13th of 2020, my dad, the one that raised me, died. Mm-hmm. March 24th of 2020, COVID hit and the whole world shut down, and that included prison visitation.
Yeah, so there'd be no more visiting in person.
Mm-mm. Which by that point, I had already decided I wanted to go back and see him again, and suddenly I couldn't.
And did they have virtual visits?
They eventually did, yes. Which was actually, it's one of those being able to look back with 2020 vision. In hindsight, the virtual visits were so amazing.
Oh yeah, I bet.
Because I got to see him face to face. I think we were doing them every other week. I got to see him face to face every other week, instead of, at best, I could have done, if I was going to go see him face to face, I might have been able to do it every 3 or 4 months.
And it's tiring, and it's, you got to get up.
It's exhausting. It's expensive. You've got to get a hotel for the night, at least one night, probably 2 nights.
Yeah.
Louisiana, I won't say is a horrible place, but it's not a place I really want to hang out. There's a lot of places that are prettier to go to.
When we drive to Destin, like, we cruise on past, we like to cruise on through there. Yeah.
So
there's some parts of Louisiana that are beautiful and nice.
Oh yeah.
There's some parts that aren't as nice. So
yeah. So the virtual visitation was amazing because I did get to see him, which let us build a relationship better than I think the 10-minute phone calls, even though the virtual visits were the same thing. They were 10 minutes.
Okay. So you couldn't like spend the day with him on virtual.
No, you got 10 minutes with him, but even it's kind of like, when people talk about learning to play guitar, if you practice 10 minutes every day, or you practice for 8 hours every 2 months, the person practicing 10 minutes a day is going to be way better than the dude that spends 8 hours every couple months.
True.
Same thing for visitation. We got to know each other better 10 minutes at a time every 2 weeks than we ever would have face-to-face for 8 hours every 3 months.
So I want to hear all about these calls. I want to hear about, was your kids and stuff able to come say hi on the camera?
They did. I left it up to them. I didn't want, this was not something,
you weren't trying to like throw this at them.
Well, I didn't want to throw it at them. I think we talked about it early on. I can't remember.
Yeah,
all 3 of my kids are on the autism spectrum.
Oh, no, I didn't know that.
Change is hard for them. It was already hard enough to know that, oh, by the way, you have a bonus grandparent. Then to add, and your bonus grandparent's in prison. That's a lot to take in. So I didn't want to grab someone and be like, here, come say hi to your other grandparent. If they, I told him that too. I was like, if they want to meet you, cool. If they don't, I'm never going to tell them they have to. This is my little journey that I'm on, and not like selfishly it's mine, but it's my journey that I've chosen to be on. It's not a journey that I'm going to put them on. They can choose to get on. And same with Pam. She could choose to get on a video and see him or talk to him. I was never going to tell anybody they had to. So
they chose.
Yeah.
They probably were getting interested because you were enjoying the visits too.
Yeah, I think they were super curious because, if one thing came out of this, and it had been like this for Pam and I's marriage for a long time, but, I'm sure you've read, we've had some spirited talks on your Facebook page about all this.
Oh, God. I couldn't believe, I apologize to some of the people.
You know what? Totally fine when you step off into places that are not adoptee and DNA surprise specific.
Yeah, they probably didn't even know that you were seeing all that, but
yeah, outside of that, gosh, what was it? I was saying something and I went away.
Oh, you were saying on Facebook, we're both so tired.
Yeah,
I know, we're busted. Oh, you were saying on Facebook, you were saying with Pam about something about your relationship. You said you and Pam through the years and your
Oh, somebody had talked about, honoring your parents and things like that.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've always thought, and I mean, I've thought this well before I met my biological father, just as a police officer, when you see train wrecks of families, is one of the best ways to honor your family or your parents a lot of times is to break the cycle of garbage they were in while you were their kid.
Right.
So one of the cycles I wanted no part of was secrets.
Right. We did talk about this. I said, did you choose to tell your kids? And you said, yeah, because you didn't want to repeat the same.
Yeah. So
they kind of found out too that who they thought were their grandparents weren't actually their grandparents.
Yeah. So when we would have very open discussions in the living room about, here's what we talked about, just like when I told you about telling them, not everybody needs to know everything. My younger one didn't need to know all the illegal stuff
right.
my dad did in prison, but he could know that he seems like a decent man now. And those were the kind of conversations we had. So I think that eventually made them all curious.
Well, I want to hear more about this. I'm about to take us off recording. If you guys are just tuning in, this is Brad Ewell telling his incredible story of how he met his biological father after not knowing that he was adopted till he was 46, 47, 48 years old. But the story just begins there. And we are really diving into this. So many twists and turns. And actually the story is getting to be happier as we continue to talk. And I think in our 4th episode, I want to hear all about your dad and your biological dad and the visits and how all of that came about and what's happening now. So thank you so much. If you haven't seen episodes 1 and 2, jump on 1 or 2, check your watches. You guys, I stopped stepping because I wanted to focus on Brad and I got tired, but you guys probably got a good 4,000 to 5,000 steps in today. So thank you guys so much for joining us, and let's tune in next time for Step to Stories with Just Lean In.